James Rogan is a former U.S. congressman from California. He was one of the prosecutors in the Clinton impeachment. Currently, he is a sitting California Superior Court judge for Northern Orange County. James has written a new book, Catching Our Flag, Behind the Scenes in a Presidential Impeachment, in which he expresses his belief that Barack Obama is using lessons from the Clinton impeachment to avoid a similar fate. Let's welcome to the Global Freedom Report, James Rogan.
Brett, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Appreciate your joining us. You've been a congressman, a prosecutor, a state representative. You're currently a Superior Court judge. Do you find the various hats that you have worn to create any kind of conflict or confusion? In other words, you've been part of all three branches of government, even though I know your role as a prosecutor was an extension of your legislative role. But nevertheless, do you ever find that your values as a legislator or prosecutor interfering with your role as a judge?
Actually, just FYI, I was a real prosecutor before any of that. I was a gang murder prosecutor in the L.A. County District Attorney's Office up in Los Angeles. But no, that's a very long resume I have, and it just gives credence to my mother-in-law's constantly telling me I don't seem to be able to keep a job.
But no, seriously, you don't. So you haven't found the change of branches, governmental branches, to be difficult at all? Like get into habits as a prosecutor that just don't work as a judge, or you know what I'm saying?
No, you know what? I have found each one of those positions to be fascinating and interesting on their own, and I've never had any problem switching hats. It probably comes from the fact that I bartended my way through law school working on Hollywood Sunset Strip, and when you go to work every night, you're having to deal with roofers and Hell's Angels and PhDs and be able to talk to all of them. You get to be rather adaptable.
Obama just came out and declared that he's not going to obey a provision of a law enacted by Congress, even though he agreed to the provision in order to get the law passed. How does he get away with such egregious usurpations of power?
Well, as a judge, I probably shouldn't talk about any individual instance, but if I can speak generally to that, I think one of the lessons from Bill Clinton's impeachment is that a president can have a very bold attitude and understands that the American people can have a very short attention span for such things. They get tired of it, they move on, and one of the lessons from the Bill Clinton impeachment experience that President Clinton taught everybody is that if you can just ride this wave out, this too shall pass. And he understood that better than most back then, but I think his legacy will continue for future predecessors, or for future successors, rather.
In other words, we have a country filled with ADD.
Well, you said it, I didn't. I still have to run for re-election as a judge.
Short attention span theater. All right, well, not as a judge, but as a former congressman. Let's be a little more general. Can you tell us why there is such reluctance to hold presidents to the rule of law? Clinton, Bush, Obama, they've all overstepped their authority at one point or another. But it's like Congress is afraid to act as a body. Now, when you were a congressman, did you get any insight into that?
I think that, those who are the master of the 5 or 10 second soundbite are the ones who can dominate the debate. And Bill Clinton was a master of the soundbite. He was able to, it took him a trial and error, but he finally got there. He was able to convince everybody it's all about sex. And once people started repeating that mantra, nobody was interested anymore about, no, it's really about perjury in a civil rights lawsuit. It's really about obstruction of justice. They were also very successful in convincing people that to impeach a president is undoing an election, which of course is just the opposite. As my friend Larry Arnn, now president of Hillsdale College, once wrote at the time, he said, elections are just as much a part of the Constitution as are impeachments. And when presidents do things to deserve impeachment, it is they and not the people or the Congress who is undoing the election. But we seem to have forgotten that lesson somewhere along the way.
I want to try and pick your brain a little from the standpoint of your congressional experience here, because I can't really get into stuff with you as a sitting judge, but you're no longer a congressman. And why doesn't Congress declare war anymore? Well, it's abdicated its constitutional authority to do so, and it's just sort of handed it over to the president. And can you explain what's behind that? We haven't declared war on anyone since World War II.
Congress has abdicated its responsibility in more areas than that. I mean, I think our founders would be spinning in their graves if they saw what the notion of limited government they gave us has morphed into. And it's not just Congress's fault. Between the Congress, the United States Supreme Court, and any president who is more than willing to step into the power vacuum of extending and stretching beyond all intent of the founders, the power and scope of the federal government, the notion that we are a limited government has become something of a joke. And so this is not a phenomenon that's new to this Congress. This has been going on for decades.
Yes, but as a congressman, for example, you're aware of this. I mean, did you ever stand up and say, now, wait a moment, guys, you can't do this. Don't you understand? The founders did this, that, and the other thing. Ron Paul does this all the time. What happens? I mean, are such pleas just ignored, or are they procedurally divested? What happens in Congress when people of good heart and good conscience raise these issues as congressmen and nothing ever happens?
When I was there, it wasn't Libya and Afghanistan. It was Kosovo and Bosnia and other places. And again, in a 24/7 news cycle where the president, whoever that president may be, enjoys the bully pulpit, as Teddy Roosevelt used to talk about, and members of Congress who are they may not like the fact that the president is sending troops without getting congressional authorization, permission, or even a declaration of war. They are very goosey about casting any kind of vote when troops are in harm's way that would appear to be something other than 100% supportive of our armed forces. And I think that's part of the explanation. The other part, of course, is that we've had a domination in Congress of people who are perfectly happy to let federal power expand and run rampant. And even when the president's doing it, it's easy to turn a blind eye if that is your vision of government.
What about discussions on setting limits on the court? And I understand you're a judge now, but even you just said it. Even the Supreme Court and other courts today are behaving frequently in manners our founding fathers would find reprehensible. And did Congress, when you were in Congress, were there ever any discussions about, we gotta put a rein on the courts? I mean, we have the power to do that. Or
there's always a discussion about it when I was there because, but it always had to deal with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the most reverse circuit by the U.S. Supreme Court and happens to be the circuit out in my neck of the woods, out in on the West Coast. But again, Congress is just reluctant to do things like that, and we don't have enough. I think the main problem, Brent, is there are not enough people going to Congress these days who are schooled in constitutional philosophy, and particularly schooled in the notion of a Republican form of government. Most of them, or I shouldn't say most, but I noticed when I was there an increasing number of members of Congress are professional staffers who get hired by a member of Congress, work the donor lists and the donor community. They keep an eye out for a congressman who's sick or dying or retiring, or they wait until their boss pulls the plug. And so you get this sort of, incestuous relationship of staffers becoming congressmen, whose goal in life was to become a congressman, and then once they get there, don't want to cast votes or do things that will either take away or minimize their power or put their reelection in jeopardy. It's not what the founders intended, and I think it's one of the great unfortunate truths of political reality in the 21st century.
As a judge, would you think that the answer to the problem lies in the judiciary? Can the judiciary solve the problem? Or is it something that's become so endemic to the United States that we would have to actually clean out the whole legislature to fix it, or what?
The notion of federal judges serving for life upon good behavior is what the founders gave us. And I believe that they did the right thing. They didn't want judges to be swayed by temporary public opinion. The problem is that the founders never intended for federal judges to take the bench, who were really hiding behind their judicial robes and becoming political activists, interpreting the Constitution the way they wish it had been written instead of the way that it has been written. Out in California, we allow the initiative process. And the day after an initiative to limit the size and scope of power passes in California, somebody runs right into federal court and gets a judge to issue an injunction, or gets a federal judge with lifetime tenure and no accountability to declare it unconstitutional. We've seen that over and over with immigration reform and other areas. And so,
yeah, but what about, you said it yourself, on good behavior? It seems that everybody has forgotten those two little words. And when a judge goes out there and in some way issues a disingenuous ruling, that's not good behavior anymore.
The only remedy for a federal judge to remove them is they either die in office or they get impeached. And one of the more interesting aspects of the Clinton impeachment that I discuss in the book is that most people don't remember. They think there have only been 2 impeachments, but there are actually, at the time of Clinton's impeachment, there were about 17. Most of them were federal judges. And the average judicial impeachment could take 2, 3, or 4, sometimes 6 months of the Senate's time. When we got there with Clinton's impeachment, the Senate wanted us to have their so-called trial in one day, and they did backflips and turned handsprings, trying to do everything they could to keep us from ever having a real trial. And so I'm afraid when it comes to impeachments and the remedy for rogue officials, whether they are in the judiciary or in the White House, Congress, but particularly the Senate, is very reluctant to act unless it's somebody that they just choose politically to get away with, that they want to get rid of them.
Let's talk about your new book, and congratulations on it, Catching Our Flag Behind the Scenes in a Presidential Impeachment. And that's great. We don't get, when I say we, I mean ordinary people, we don't get a sense of what goes on in the halls of Congress, you know, in the courts. I mean, we watch it on television, and I'm sure you could tell me that that's not really the way it all happens. In your book... It's
not the way it happens, and this book will prove it, because one of the unique aspects of my book is this. From the first day I got on the Judiciary Committee, which ironically was the day before the Lewinsky story broke, I knew that if this thing ever blew up into a real impeachment, there would be so many revisionist histories written that you wouldn't be able to trust them. This book is not based on interviews I did. It's not based on recollection. It's based on 3 feet of diaries that I kept. In every one of those behind-the-scenes meetings, as the words were coming out of people's mouths, the Republicans as well as the Democrats, I was trying to get them down, and I was trying to do it for the sake of history. I've waited all these years to write the book because I wanted to let passions cool. I didn't want there to be any concern that this was some kind of get-even book. It is just a down and dirty, here's what was really happening, and here's what the players were saying behind the scenes, even though they may have been saying something different in front of the TV cameras. I think it'll be a real eye-opener for people that read it.
Now, you've suggested that Barack Obama has taken certain lessons from that period in order to avoid a similar fate. Now, you mentioned one of them already, this whole idea of, hey, it will pass. You just give it a little bit of time, which, by the way, I think is brilliant politics. I hate to say it. He is right when he says that. But what are some of the lessons that you think Obama may have taken?
Well, I think that, and it's not, and I don't want to say this about Obama personally. I was really talking about future presidents, that there are some lessons to learn. I was going to say, or any president at all. Some of the lessons. This could be anybody, Democrat or Republican. Exactly. Number one is that Congress really doesn't have the stomach for removing a president from office for violating their constitutional oath. Of course, the exception was Nixon. But there was just such personal disdain against Nixon. I think that makes it a rather unique experience. But a president who has at least halfway decent poll numbers, we learned from the Clinton experience that polls govern. And as I quote people in the book from my diaries, Democrats and Republicans behind the scenes who were very candid in saying, hey, look, we're holding our breath and we're waiting to see where the polls go on this. And if he starts going south, we're going to bounce him out so fast your head will swim. And if the polls hold, we're coming after you guys and saying you're on a sexual witch hunt. And there's a lesson to be learned from that, because future presidents now see that the precedent, if you will, is that if I can just keep the public happy, keep my poll numbers up, keep proposing things that look like I'm doing things for people, they'll get bored with this issue and their mind will come off it. And impeachment is not something that happens overnight. It is, by its very nature, a laborious, labor-intensive, quasi-judicial function that takes a lot of review, a lot of study. It takes a lot of investigation. And if I were a president wanting to skirt the Constitution, I would be very mindful of the fact that if I can just keep people engaged on another topic and keep yelling at my opponents for wasting millions of dollars while I'm the one dragging my feet and causing the waste, I'm probably going to be able to ride this wave.
Let's talk about the Clinton impeachment. Are there any, untold stories, political or otherwise, that you could share with us from back then?
Well, that's what the whole book is, but I'll give you a tidbit. There was, after the 1998 elections, the Republicans got this terrible shellac, and it was laid right at the foot of Ken Starr, impeachment, and this impeachment review. We came back, the last thing we had to do before Congress adjourned after the election was to have the Judiciary Committee hearing where Starr was going to testify. Henry Hyde really had the stuffing knocked out of him. Gingrich was bounced out, but we didn't have a new speaker yet, and Henry was getting terribly pressured. By the way, for your younger listeners, Henry Hyde was chairman of the Judiciary Committee at the time and the head of the impeachment review. He wanted to find a way to just make an exit, and he tasked me with keeping a back channel opening with the White House to see if we needed to, at some point, if we needed to negotiate something. So I kept the back channels open for several months, and I got the message after the elections, it's time to sit down and have a serious discussion with the White House to make this go away. And so I had a prearranged meeting with my White House counterpart who told me we're not meeting anymore. And I said, well, I thought that was the whole point of this, to wait until after the elections and see if there's something that can be done short of the nuclear option. And he said, my instructions from the White House are that I'm not to negotiate with you. We've determined that in light of the disastrous election results that you guys have suffered, you'll never impeach him and we don't have to deal with you anymore. And I finally said as we ended the conversation, I just have to know, where did this direction come from? And the answer stunned me. He told me Hillary Clinton. And what I didn't tell my counterpart at the time is this happened during a very small window period where I think the Republican leadership was ready to toss in the towel and negotiate a truce on this. And because they didn't, they walked away from the table and basically gave the Republicans the finger. The last thing we had to do under the law was hold our hearings. When we held the hearings, people came back to Washington. They started reviewing the evidence. And once they reviewed the evidence of perjury and obstruction, people who had previously declared they would not vote to impeach Clinton had to publicly reverse themselves. And the rest is history. The president ended up getting impeached. And so of all the ironies of that whole history, the greatest one to me that I've talked about in the book is that Bill Clinton forever bears the tattoo of impeachment, and it's because his wife gave the direction that we don't have to talk to them.
And the book is available through Amazon and bookstores, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And it's also at wndbooks.com as well. Let me ask you a more personal question, if I may. You're a judge.
Sure.
Do you find it difficult to have a personal life? Meaning that, do you worry that if you're engaged in just an ordinary conversation with somebody, you got to watch what you say, you got to watch what you talk about, because somewhere someone might interpret it as making you biased in your professional life?
That is a constant worry that a judge has to have, especially trial court judges, because under the canons of judicial ethics, we can't say or do anything that would make us appear that we have either prejudged a matter or that we are prejudiced against the matter or against a party. And so we really have to be very circumspect about what we say, we can't talk at political groupings. We can't go out and give speeches for candidates. You basically give up a lot of your First Amendment right when you become a judge. Although having been in Congress and the state legislature before that, if there's anything a politician learns, it's try to keep your mouth shut. I'm mindful of the old Sam Rayburn warning to new members of Congress when he was Speaker in the 40s and the 50s. He told them nobody here ever got defeated for re-election on the speech they didn't give. But yeah, you do have to surrender a number of your liberties that most people take for granted, so that you don't do anything to compromise your judicial position.
Have you ever, in your career as a judge, have you ever encountered a situation where something that you just said innocently in a conversation somehow came back, to haunt you in your courtroom or something?
Well, if I ever did, I certainly wouldn't repeat it on the radio for the Commission on Judicial Performance to come track me down and kill me for it. So nothing comes to mind. But if it did, I'd probably have to take the fifth. I
withdraw the questions. It was actually a matter of personal curiosity, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot that way. My guest has been current Superior Court Judge James Rogan, former Congressman the United States, former state representative, and former impeachment prosecutor, among many other things. James, I want to thank you so much for spending this time with us. If you're interested in his book, Catching Our Flag, Behind the Scenes in a Presidential Impeachment, get an inside look at it. www.wndbooks.com. James, the best of luck with it. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you. My best to you and all your listeners. Thanks again.